It was designed in a post-war rush to dominate the skies. It carried the power to end the world, and more than 70 years later, it's still flying missions. Some say it's too old to live, others say it's too legendary to die. This is the story of the B-52 Stratofortress. Well, welcome, friends, to Destination Aviation, or back to Destination Aviation, your podcast for all things aviation related. I'm Jeff Miller, your host. I wanted to start off by saying, I don't know if your ears are deceiving you, or maybe you heard, that wasn't our normal intro. That was a B-52 going overhead. So you heard a little bit of the theme of what this episode's going to be at the beginning, and I'll be curious what people have to say about that intro. I did have a comment come in. Thank you, Andrew, for the comment about maybe powering up my beginning. I kind of like the old opening. I mean, I chose it, but, as again, I'm always open here to thoughts and suggestions. So if you have comments on the new opening versus maybe the old opening, maybe we'll just keep it special for this episode, or maybe we'll keep using it for future episodes. I'll have to see what you guys have to say about it. So drop me a line at dapodcast85@gmail.com. That's your spot to let me know what you think about it, or anything else for that matter. You can also get out our website. We got new podcast stickers. I've been giving them out. Tell people if they don't like them, they can affix it to something they don't like. People can draw on my face. Whatever you so choose to do with the stickers. But if you want one yourself, please feel free to get onto the website and take a look at those. I've been saying this for a while now, and we also have we've had a bunch of great guests, and we have a bunch of future great guests too, and we have some in the process right now as well, as we're working through that. But I've been saying that I'm going to get one of these episodes out because I get a lot of comments from people that they want a story. They want to hear a story. And I love story time. I really do. And I've been getting a lot of comments in about the Air Force One episode, and also the episode that we did with spooky stories. And so, maybe what we'll do is we'll ping some of the people we know in the industry as we get into October to see if people want to share their own spooky stories in aviation. But as we go over those kind of two themes, and I've been thinking through my head, what would be a cool story to talk about? Maybe throw some stuff in there over time. And what has more history than the B-52? It's a living, flying piece of history. You can go see it today, flying around. As a matter of fact, one was just in the news. Unfortunately, it was a SkyWest aircraft, and fortunately, nobody got hurt in that incident. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll talk about here in a little bit as we get into the episode. So the B-52 is still fresh in everyone's mind. It's not in the history books. It's not just sitting in the museums. It's out flying. And as a matter of fact, sometimes I even forget how old this aircraft is until I see somebody put something on LinkedIn. Kind of the usual, hey, your grandkids are flying what your grandfather flew, that type of stuff. And it always is a reminder to me of, oh, yeah, the B-52. I've been watching some Cold War era stuff from back Duluth, Minnesota, all these things. And I really didn't know what, strategic location it was in that kind of northern hemisphere, Minnesota, upper Michigan, for when we talk about Cold War era. So this, to me, is going to be, I think, be a special episode. And I hope you're going to come along with the journey on us here as we get into a little bit more of just what we were doing in the past. So you see a little different with the opening, when it's not an interview, kind of a homage to the past, if you will, of where we have been and where we're going together. I'm super excited. The podcast continues to grow. So thank you so much for all of you that come back and listen to me ramble on. I was just down at a Cubs game with some really great people, had some conversations with them about listening to the podcast. Someone that I know who said they're going to be a future guest. I have to get those emails out. Their kids listen to the podcast, and that's really awesome. I love to hear that. So thank you so much to those people that are tuning in and listening to what we're doing here. We also have a bunch of questions that have come in through email, the ones that are appropriate, which most of them are, and maybe some funny ones too we'll share. There are some, when you have stuff out there, your general email, you get a lot of stuff in that has nothing to do with you and nobody actually knows what you're doing. I kind of run through that on the social media side to this. I get a lot of messages through like the TikTok, especially that platform. It seems like some on Instagram, but more on the TikTok side of the world. So people send in messages. I think a lot of them, there's a ton that are reality. They're real people, and then the same with anything on the internet. There's a ton of people that are just fake. Who knows who they are in a basement in Russia? I don't know. pick whatever you want. I'm sure people have more better things to do once they realize they're emailing Jeff Miller on his Destination Aviation podcast. They probably go find a better target than me. But I will get at the end of this episode. We'll open up that letter mailbag that people have been sending in. Just go through some of the comments and questions. I like to connect with the fans a little bit. And so thank you so much for those of you that do reach out to me and listen. And even if you're not a fan, you can still reach out. Send me a message. That's okay too. But I appreciate it. So like I said, we're doing a little bit back to older style episode. You're talking just with Jeff Miller here, nobody else, just you and I here, in your earbuds or wherever you're listening to this. And we're going to talk about the B-52. And we're going to talk about the history of the B-52, and we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's in the newspapers today. And then at the end, we'll finish up, like I said, with some questions from the viewers. So without further ado, we'll get right into our story of the B-52, the Flying Stratofortress. In 1946, the U.S. saw a strong post-war economic boom with increased industrial production and consumer spending. It also presented challenges, including high inflation, labor unrest, and the drop of President Truman's approval rating. Tensions were high with the Soviet Union. Winston Churchill, 1946, famously used the term Iron Curtain to describe the division of Europe and Eastern European nations falling under Soviet influence. The speech highlighted the growing divide of ideological conflict between the West and the Soviet Union. While there is some dispute from historians of the Cold War's official start date, many historians peg this time, 1946, and the following years, as really the start to the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So World War II had just ended, the Soviet Union, though, was rising, and the Iron Curtain is falling. America is racing to stay on top. The atomic age had just begun, and with it came a terrifying new mission of delivering nuclear firepower across the globe. The U.S. Air Force wanted a bomber, but not just any bomber. They needed something big, something fast, something that could carry an atomic bomb 8,000 miles without refueling. They didn't just want a plane, they wanted a message, a symbol of American power. In 1946, the Air Force put out a requirement for a jet-powered bomber capable of carrying nuclear weapons intercontinentally. Boeing initially proposed a straight-wing turboprop design. The real breakthrough came in 1951 when Boeing's engineering went with a swept-wing design with 8 turbojet engines, which would become the signature look of the B-52. At a table strewn with napkins, sketches, and ashtrays, Boeing engineers went from props to jets almost overnight. The Stratofortress was born, an aircraft so massive it looked more like a train with wings, but it worked. I have seen the B-52 several times in my life, but I did, and if you get on our TikTok and ever look at this, my iPhone did me dirty back in the day. It actually it put out a video of early moments together, and I put this to Grover Washington Jr. song, just the two of us, because it was me on a solo trip to the northern part of not only Minnesota, but in Michigan at Sawyer, what used to be Sawyer Air Force Base, which closed in 1995. But they operated the B-52s out of there. So they actually have one on display. It's a little known area on the airport. Like if you're not from, it's not widely known. But there's some pictures. If you get on our TikTok and look, you'll see the video I'm speaking of. But just getting up by the B-52, it's massive. They have one on display there from back in the day. I think it did operate out of there, if I remember right from the sign that's next to it. But really cool, just massive to see up close and personal like that. So if you find yourself traveling through the upper peninsula of Michigan, swing by Marquette Airport now, or what used to be Sawyer Air Force Base, and check it out. It's open to the public. There's no charge or anything. You can just walk around and take a look at them. But it's so cool just to be kind of sitting there taking back in history, and especially there where they used to operate out of. But it reminded me of this point here when we're talking about what's happening in 1946 with the design of this, just the massive, describing it as a train. It definitely has a lot of that feel to it when you're up close. So if you think about aircraft production, it's kind of amazing. So we went from 1946 to the first flight and early deployment of this aircraft, April 15th of 1952. So yes, you're hearing that correctly. Roughly 6 years later, to come out with this aircraft, just to go to show ingenuity that was happening at that time. And now, obviously, we have a lot of layers and things that happen. But, I have some friends that work for Lockheed Martin, and sometimes there's always some good back and forth. But rightfully so, right? There's complicated systems that need time these days. But to go over 6 years to deliver this, it's kind of when you hear the same about the public works departments back in the day, right? Building the Golden Gate Bridge, building the Mackinac Bridge, whatever it might be. And then you're like, oh, well, you can never do that today. And regardless of the kind of back and forth, we won't get into that, but it is amazing to see that over the time frame of roughly 6 years, this aircraft was developed from really what was a prop plane to ushering turbojet engines to really iconic aircraft that's still flying to this day. Amazing, 70 plus years later, we're operating this aircraft. So in 1952, this first aircraft flew. Production of the full aircraft started in 1955, and by the early 1960s, hundreds were in service. Node variants of it were the B-52A, the B-52H. Only the H is still in service today. I actually didn't know that until I was doing research into this aircraft. At full power, the B-52 screamed off the runway with 8 engines blazing. It was sleek, it wasn't stealthy, but it could haul nearly 70,000 pounds of bombs and fly higher and farther than anything else on Earth. This B-52 was no precision tool. It was a blunt force instrument designed to win a potential World War III before it ever even started.
At Castle Air Force Base, California, the B-52, America's biggest and newest jet bomber, goes into squadron service with the Strategic Air Command. A wingspan of 185 feet, length of over 150 feet, and intercontinental range. Over 6,000 miles without refueling. Combat ceiling of 50,000 feet and a speed estimated at over 600 miles an hour. That's the B-52, shown in these Defense Department films going into active service in quantity, threatening devastating counterattack to any aggressor. The mightiest bomber in history.
So that was actually a newsreel from 1955 when the B-52 first rolled off, and we talked about the B-52 variants A through H, which I figured it's probably a quick moment at least to stop to go through it, since I didn't actually completely understand each variation of it. So the B-52A 1954 test model, only 3 were built. They never saw combat, strictly for flight testing, shorter range, simpler systems. Think of it as a rough draft, not quite ready for war, but essentially getting the design airborne. Kind of like this podcast. Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, are you a one and done? And sometimes I am, unless I'm trying to say something like World War III. Then I might have to take it a few times because it sounds like but the B-52A, we're in kind of that test phase. The B-52B and C were the first operational versions of the B-52. B introduced basic bombing and navigation systems. C had larger fuel tanks and better avionics. These were the bombers that helped the Air Force go intercontinental. They could finally carry a real nuclear payload across oceans. The B-52D, or Delta model, was a Vietnam workhorse, modified for conventional bombing or carpet bombing, carried external bombs under the wings. The iconic model in Operation Linebacker 2. If you've seen footage of the B-52s blanketing jungles in Vietnam, you've seen the D model. The B-52E and F, or Echo and Foxtrot, transitional models with upgraded electronics and fire control systems. Few were built. They didn't stick around long. Somebody was referenced as saying they were good in-betweeners, good but not great. I didn't get who quoted that, but I found it through my readings. The B-52G, or Gulf model, heavily redesigned with a shorter vertical tail, internal fuel tanks, and longer range, carried cruise missiles started in the 1980s. Many were lost due to airframe fatigue or accidents. The G was leaner, longer, legged, and deadlier in a missile age of combat. We'll talk a little bit more about mishaps later on here. The B-52H, 1961 to present, so what we talked about before, what's the current flying model, or Hotel. The only model still flying today. It's switched from turbojets to turbofans for better fuel economy, equipped with nuclear cruise missiles, upgraded avionics, is constantly modernized with new radar engines that are, I guess, coming soon from the articles that I've been seeing, and a digital cockpit. This granddaddy is still on duty. The B-52H Maybe over 60 years old, but with all the upgrades, it's basically flying into the 21st century wearing new bones. So each version of the B-52 tells a story from test flights to firebombing to nuclear deterrence, but only one, the H model or Hotel, has outlasted them all, and it's not done yet. It's still flying. We'll talk a little bit about that further. But I did want to reference it since we touched on it briefly. We'll get back into kind of the design and kickoff of the B-52, but just so we know all the variants of it, since yours truly, I didn't actually know that until I started reading up on this. Testing was over and production had started. It was time for the B-52's strategic rollout into the Cold War. Meant to fly long-haul missions directly into Soviet airspace with a nuclear payload, it was deployed as part of the Strategic Air Command. The B-52 stood on a 24/7 nuclear alert. Some aircraft were kept airborne at all times in case of Soviet First Strike or Operation Chrome Dome, which sometimes people refer to my head as that, Operation Chrome Dome. For decades, the B-52s sat on icy tarmacs across the U.S., engines hot, crew ready, loaded with live nuclear missiles. Their mission was simple. It was terrifying. If we get hit, fly into the heart of the Soviet Union and deliver hell. The crew consisted of 5, a pilot, a co-pilot, a radar navigator, an electronic warfare officer. The yoke and flight controls are so heavy that it reportedly takes real muscle to maneuver the aircraft. Each B-52 had a unique name, often that went along with nose art. Nicknamed Buff, or Big Ugly Fat Fella. Again, I don't know, Chrome Dome and Big Ugly Fat Fella. It's like people are talking about me here. Or a more colorful version name for the B-52. I referenced it in a previous podcast. I can't remember which episode now, but I remember referencing Buff. Just as long as people don't start calling me Buff. Keep or start. Either way, people might be signing already out there. The B-52 wasn't just an aircraft. It was a Cold War juggernaut, a daily reminder that peace hung on a very delicate balance. It was born out of fear, forged in paranoia, and built to deliver destruction on a scale that no one had seen before. And incredibly, the same machine is still flying today.
South Vietnamese troops pour into the swampy jungles of the Mekong Delta, the important rice-growing area in South Vietnam. It's a seek, find, destroy operation against the Viet Cong.
For nearly a decade, the B-52 found itself in the shadows, armed and waiting. Its mission, nuclear retaliation. But by the mid-1960s, it found itself called into a very different war, not to level cities in a single blast, but to rain fire on the jungles of Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War brought in a new era for the B-52, taking it from a nuclear sentinel to a conventional beast. The B-52D, or Delta model, were adapted for conventional warfare, carrying up to 108 bombs in one dropping. Missions were part of Operation Arc Light starting in 1965 and later Linebacker 1 and 2. Crews flew from Guam or Thailand and spent over 12 hours in a round trip. Carpet bombing areas saturated with 5 to 750 pound bombs. The B-52 became a hammer in Americans' arsenal, used to break enemy supplies, demolish jungle encampments, and intimidate the North Vietnamese government. It's interesting, and I've talked about this before, but the book that I've been reading, and I've taken a bit of a back burner, or I still haven't finished it. I'm close to finishing it, but The Origins of the Top Gun School. Dan Pedersen, who's the author of that book, he talks very much about how Lyndon Johnson would not allow the bombing raids to really take out any strategic locations. Again, opinions, but opinions of someone who was there. It's interesting, as the older you get, the more you kind of look at, wars and conflicts, and you think in black and white, but a lot of it is in that gray area, as we start reading from the people who were there. In 1972, Operation Linebacker 2, or the Christmas bombing, was 11 days of relentless B-52 strikes over Vietnam, intended to pressure North Vietnam to back into the peace table. Over 700 missions were flown during this period, and 15 B-52s were shot down. That's right, you heard that correctly, 15. It's amazing. We'll look at just what the B-2 did in Iran in that mission, but to think about, where you have 15 of these shot down, and that resulted in 90 crew that were lost or captured. Some of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, was Vietnam at this time. MiGs and surface-to-air missiles were everywhere. And if you do pick up that Dan Pedersen book, he does speak a lot about his time there when he flew the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam. A lot of interesting stories from someone who was on the front lines. For the first time, the B-52 did fly into a real shooting war, one where stealth wasn't an option and losses were very, very real. Crews often described riding a slow bus through hell when they would take the B-52 into Vietnam. Inside the cockpit was long hours, oxygen masks, sweat, and stress. Survivors of a downed B-52 often ended up at the Hanoi Hilton POW camps. One pilot said, "It was like flying into a meat grinder. We knew some of us weren't coming back." And I talked about seeing one of these up close and personal, and if you get a chance to go look at one, just the impressiveness of their size, let alone, you start to think about the psychological impacts of bombing campaigns with the B-52. And we heard at the beginning of this episode the sound of the B-52. Still waiting on you guys here as we get into further along the episode to send me a message about whether you like the new beginning or not. But the psychological impact, the sound and scale of B-52 strikes were traumatic for both enemy forces and sometimes civilians caught in the wrong place. Vietnamese troops called them the whispering death. You wouldn't hear them until the bombs were falling. Entire sections of the jungles were erased in seconds, craters big enough to swallow buildings. To some, the B-52 was a guardian. To others, it was a ghost in the sky. Post-Vietnam combat from this time in the Gulf War, 1980s to the 1990s, the B-52G or Gulf models were modernized for cruise missiles and used in long-range standoff strikes. In 1991, the Gulf War, the B-52 returned in force, flying from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana to Iraq and back within 35-hour round-trip missions. Massive use of the conventional cruise missiles and guided bombs were used during this time, and the B-52s were also used in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq as a precision instrument now versus what it was doing in Vietnam. They called it precision bombing with a sledgehammer. No longer just a Cold War relic, the B-52 is now playing with new toys and still doing more significant damage. The era of Vietnam for the B-52 gave it its battle scars and its battlefield legacy. It had been built to end the world, but it found itself a true calling in the skies above real wars, flown by real people who lived or died by the strengths of its wings. Broken arrows and near catastrophes. The B-52 has a long legacy, and part of that is mishaps and incidents. It was built to carry the end of the world, but on more than one occasion, the B-52 nearly delivered it by accident. They're called broken arrows because the U.S. military's term for accidents involving nuclear weapons since the 1950s has been broken arrow. There have been since that period more than 30 times that there's been a broken arrow incident. Several of them involve the B-52.
H minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Goldsboro, North Carolina, 1961. A B-52 broke apart in midair after a mechanical failure. 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs dropped from the wreckage. One bomb safety mechanism failed. Only one switch prevented a detonation. The bomb was later found stuck upright in a farmer's field. Had it detonated, it would have unleashed a blast 250 times more powerful than Hiroshima, wiping out about half of North Carolina. In 1968, Thule Air Base in Greenland, a B-52 on airborne nuclear alert crashed into the ice near Thule. Carried aboard were 4 thermonuclear bombs. Massive radiation leak followed. A complicated recovery and political scandal followed. The U.S. and Denmark denied the presence of nukes, but locals and former cleanup workers got sick. Some never recovered. 1966, Palomar, Spain. Mid-air refueling collision between a B-52 and a tanker. 4 nukes dropped, 2 landed intact, 2 burst open, scattering plutonium dust across the Spanish countryside. Led to the U.S. buying tons of Spanish soil to bury it back home. One bomb wasn't recovered for months. It was found in the bottom of the Mediterranean. Spain was furious, and the U.S. promised transparency, but the full truth is still debatable to this day. Why these incidents happened? The B-52s were part of Operation Chrome Dome, the 24/7 nuclear alert patrols with live bombs on board, flying just outside Soviet airspace. The logic: mutually assured destruction. The cost was near misses, crew burnout, and real risk of accidental apocalypse. At any moment, a fire, a fuel leak, or wrong switch could have triggered a disaster beyond comprehension. After multiple accidents, the U.S. ended routine airborne nuclear alerts in 1968. Ground-based alert systems took their place, but the B-52's reputation was forever marked. I did want to reference one accident post routine carrying of nuclear weapons on the B-52, and that is just because it was at Sawyer Air Force Base, and I've referenced that here before, and that's the one B-52 I've seen on display up there. The B-52H model hotel crashed during landing approach in 1977. It exploded upon impact. The crash occurred about 5 miles north of Sawyer Air Force Base in a sparsely populated wooded area. All 8 crew members on board were killed. The aircraft was reportedly on a routine training mission. A witness described the explosion being like daylight. The B-52 was built to keep the peace through fear, but in the dark skies of Cold War paranoia, that fear sometimes hit too close to home. These weren't drills, they weren't myths. They were real bombs, real crashes, and real lives nearly lost to a single loose bolt or moment of bad luck. The B-52 didn't just carry the weight of war, it carried the weight of what could have been. So we talked about this up at the beginning of the episode, but I think this is a good spot to plug it in, that if we could just talk briefly about SkyWest Flight 3788 to Minot International Airport in North Dakota. This just happened where there's a B-52 Stratofortress and them basically converging into the Minot Airport. The Stratofortress was coming in from a ceremonial flight over the North Dakota State Fair, and the SkyWest for flying for Delta Connection came out of Minneapolis. The pilot of the SkyWest Delta aircraft out of the right side saw that a potential conflict was going to happen, made a maneuver to avoid that, and then got on and told the passengers in the back that they saw this basically coming, and nobody told him about it, and that's why there was the aggressive maneuver, and he apologized for it, and it was also recorded by some passengers in the back, so you can actually get out and find some video of this if you haven't seen it around. Passengers reported that the aircraft tilted sharply. It felt like a roller coaster. Some looked out and saw grass instead of sky. The pilot added, the Air Force base has radar. Why didn't they tell the B-52s in the pattern? According to the Air Force, the bomber had communicated with Minot Approach Control and the airport tower, but the tower never relayed its presence to the inbound commercial flight. So this is still under investigation. Again, there's a lot flying around on this because it's just out there, but I did think it was a point to say to this that to me, you have an aircraft flying basically this version of it from the 1960s to now, and you're still talking about modern day incidents. It goes to a testament of at least Boeing's design of the B-52, which leads us directly into our next section, which that the bomber has outlived its replacements. So the attempts to replace the B-52, we all felt like we've tried to be replaced in life at some point, right? Most aircraft are lucky to serve 20 years. The B-52 is closing in on 100, and it's outlived every single plane meant to replace it. The B-58 Hustler, which is the 1950s to the 1970s, it was sleek, fast, and supersonic, but fragile, expensive to maintain, and couldn't carry nukes as flexible as the B-52 could. Retired just after 10 years of service, the B-52 flew on. The FB-111A, or Alpha, Aradarvark, Aradarvark, I don't know exactly that one. I try to do a good job pronouncing stuff here, but this one's getting me a little bit. But it was a smaller design for precision nuclear strike rolls. It lacked a global range and a payload of the B-52. It was phased out in the 1990s, and the B-52 stayed. The B-1B Lancer, 1980s to present, was modern, supersonic, low radar cross-section. High maintenance cost and treaty restrictions hampered it. Ground multiple times due to safety and budget, the B-52 kept on flying. The B-2 Spirit, 1990s to present. Stealthy, high-tech, $2 billion per plane. We just saw this on full scale with Iran. So expensive, only 21 were built. Most missions still went on to the old buff. The B-21 Raider, and this is coming in the late 2020s, the newest stealth bomber, but even with its entry service, the B-52 will still fly alongside it, with some airframes pushing 80 years old. How the B-52s keep on flying? The B-52's rugged design is nearly indestructible. High-altitude missions mean little stress in the airframe. Upgrades to the avionics, communication, radars, and weapon systems are continually modernized. And then the upgrading of the engines to the B-52, the Rolls-Royce F-130 engines, or F-130, to replace the ancient TF-33s. They're more fuel efficient, less maintenance, and better range. That's in this currently going on from the 2020s to 2030s. They say this, somebody was quoted to say, this isn't a relic, it's a flying museum that's still writing history. And I think that's pretty cool. The future of it, flying into the 2050s and beyond, the Air Force plans to operate the B-52 into the 2050s, potentially reaching 100 years of active service. Nicknamed the zombie bomber by some because every time it's supposed to retire, it just won't die. As we said at the beginning of this podcast, the younger air crews are now flying the same aircraft that their grandfathers once did. That's a pretty cool story. They were built to last a few decades. They created a legend that might outlive us all. The B-52 didn't just outlast the Cold War. It outlasted generations, technologies, and expectations. It wasn't supposed to be forever, but maybe, just maybe it is. So, you can't be flying for 70 plus years and not build up some legends and haunting stories. And this is getting into my favorite time of year, which is fall and Halloween. I love Halloween. I have a minion, his name's Bat Dave. I blow him up. Sometimes he sits out all year long, depends on the time. But in October, he really shines. And I love when the kids come over and get candy, and especially last year I had some astronauts that showed up. It was fantastic. So Halloween is a special time. And I'm going to look forward to doing some Halloween episodes. Halloween themes, a spooky October. But this is just a tidbit into that of where my thoughts and my ideas might be going as we talk about the B-52. But I love ending on this. And I also love when people come up and tell me that they enjoy the spooky stories. So the B-52 isn't just old. It's ancient by aviation standards. It flew in Vietnam, over Cold War flashpoints, during Gulf conflicts, and today is training and deterrence patrols. What that history comes with a deep allure and aurora of some, even say, spiritual residue. Pilots, ground crews, and veterans always speak of the buff as a more than metal. They speak of the presence of a plane that has seen things and one that remembers. The empty seat. Multiple stories from not Bakersfield and Fairchild crews talk about crew compartments having unexplained noise, seatbelts snapping closed, radios turning on, or phantom footsteps when no one's aboard. Some joking call the 6th and 7th crew position on reserved. The eerie tail gunner's echo. Before 1991, the B-52s had rear-facing tail gunners. Some aircraft today are still fitted with the vestibule, a shell of the station. Maintenance crews and storage or repair depots have claimed to hear faint Morse code tapping or headset static from disconnected systems in those compartments. It's easy to forget the B-52 isn't just steel and rivets. It's memory, it's sacrifice, it's something ancient, still alive and still flying. If any plane was going to carry ghosts with it, this is the one. So the next time you hear a distant thunder of jet engines high above, take a moment, because if it's a B-52, you're not just hearing a plane, you're hearing history and maybe something more. I hope you enjoyed the B-52 as much as I do. It's one of those aircraft that's just iconic, and you always I do, even being in this industry for so long, I forget that I may feel like I've been in the industry long, but the B-52 outruns me every day of the week, even though we are both buffs. Big, ugly, fat, we'll leave the other F out. For now. Because I have heard families listen to this show. So you can probably all imagine what the other F stands for. But I did promise up at the beginning that we would get to some messages from people. So we're going to do that right now. So if you remember the old David Letterman, I'm going to try my best at singing it. We get letters, sacks and sacks of letters, letters. And if you've never seen it, then that's original to me. There you go. Look at that. All right, Alyssa. So this is international section for folks. Alyssa from Sydney, Australia. What's the biggest difference you've noticed between flying in the U.S. and international airspace? Admittedly, I haven't flown myself outside of the country. I've been on flights outside of the U.S., so I can't speak to it as a pilot myself, but I can say as a passenger, especially when I went to Japan, the flow of how people can get in and off of an aircraft like when we landed in Tokyo, it was a 777, and I think people got off that within like, I no kidding, like 10 minutes. It was insane. Everybody was off that plane. In the U.S., you come in from a flight from like Des Moines to Chicago, and it's a CRJ 200, and you're like, I've been on this for 30 minutes. Where did I put my bag? I think I put it in the back, even though I'm in seat 1A. Thank you for the question, Alyssa. Marcus with Dallas. It's with Dallas. I don't know if that's, I don't assume the airport. I don't know Marcus with the airport down there. Maybe I do. So if I do know you, I apologize, Marcus, for that. But the question was, how long do I take to put one of these together? Oof, it depends on the episode. When it's a conversation, that's usually easier. When it's me, I'm moving stuff around, trying to plug and place things. Somebody asked me the other day at a Cubs game, am I a one-take person? I generally am. I know I mentioned this earlier, but unless I start flubbing, and sometimes I'll just leave the flub because I'm a human being, and I'm not robotic. I'm not AI. I know some people listen to AI podcasts, Mark Fava out there, but I don't. Just only his alone. But sometimes leaving in that real stuff allows people to resonate a little bit more that I am a human being. I had a coworker tell me once that I'm ugly enough that maybe this podcast will just be successful because people will think I'm a real person. I'm going to take that as a compliment. Sophia in Atlanta, do you think commercial drones really share airspace with general aviation safety? I think so. I mean, we get reports here and there of drones flying in and out of airspace and issues, but I do think that, I've seen it in action myself. I was at a golf event where somebody, was more probably amateur, should have been not trying to operate a drone. But they couldn't take it off. So for all the human errors that were placed into it, the drone was in FAA controlled airspace, and so the drone wouldn't take off. So I do think we're probably meeting that nice area where things can blend in. And I personally, when I fly, I've never run into a potential issue with a drone. Eric in Denver, he said, does ADS-B make flying safer? Or is it just adding more stress for small aircraft pilots? I know that there's a lot of controversy around ADS-B, but I will say as a pilot, I really do enjoy the situational awareness. I can also say I can understand, it's the same. If we apply some probably practical sense to ADS-B technology, if you were driving your car home and somebody could read your license plate and said he was just at the grocery store and now he's going home, I mean, you probably wouldn't like that. You probably wouldn't want people to know where your address is and stuff like that. So I can understand, finding a measure response. Airports do use that data for collection. It also is for fees and stuff. I know there's controversies about that. I don't think I'm completely in that headspace either. It's kind of like arguing about, maybe like a red light camera or a speeding camera. People have said, oh, well, the cop needs to catch me, that type of thing. So I guess I kind of meet in the middle. It's a huge safety benefit. I love it. But I would like to work on my end professionally to find some middle ground with ADS-B technology. Nina in Minneapolis, how do you think general aviation can attract more young people and women into the cockpit? I will say this. I think a lot of airports, I know a lot of professionals out there do a really good job. A lot of our associations do a really good job to bring people into this. If you haven't listened to the podcast that we had earlier where I talked with Lauren Carter from North Dakota. There's some really great, bright people getting into the industry, and I love seeing that. So I think, there's always work to be done, but I am really happy to see the people that I know moving into roles, especially the younger generation, as I I start to go more the way of the B-52 in my career. Um, this is from Greg in Montreal, Canada. The weirdest ATC instruction you ever received, and did you follow it? I haven't heard really too many weird. I'm trying to think off the cuff if there's something that was completely weird that has happened to me while I was flying. I don't think so. I've heard people arguing before, especially in an uncontrolled airport, that happens. I did hear controller in Daytona. It wasn't me, but I heard over the radio him snap at pilots that were mumbling, and he said, until you can't stop, or until you can stop, not till you, until you. Well, I'm doing it right now, Jeff. If the controller was on here, he'd be yelling at me. if you, Unless you cannot mumble, go back to the ramp and call me when you're ready to not mumble. So, I've heard a few things like that. Yeah, it was that was interesting. Let's see here, Doug, and this is in Boise. Is it true some pilots have lucky pens they only use for flight plans? I am starting a collection. I don't. I mean, at some point we'll probably have Destination Aviation pens, and I'll definitely send you one. But probably. I mean, there's a lot of superstitious people out there. It wouldn't surprise me. I haven't particularly heard this one before, but it's out there. I also received another question. This person didn't put any name on this, but they did ask me, do you like doing interviews better, or do you like being on your own? I've always found that I can keep a conversation going just by myself, good or bad. But I really have loved the interview side to it. I've enjoyed getting to learn from people and hearing their perspective on the industry. And there's a lot of cool stuff that comes out of those. I do like connect. It seems like probably as far as connecting with people, I hear it's a couple of things, right? If it's a guest experience, usually it's about the guest, which it should be. And I love that. I love hearing, I didn't know this about, Derek Martin was on one, and people were saying to Derek, and I said this to Derek, so I feel comfortable saying, like, I didn't know Derek was that nice. But I love hearing stuff like that. And then, but these type of episodes do give me a moment to connect more with you guys, the listeners. So I really appreciate it too when you reach out to me and say that you've been enjoying it, because I enjoy it too. This kind of part to it, and I learn things. You see the B-52 and you experience it, different things in life, air shows, whatever it might be, or like I said, a museum where I've seen it myself up close and personal. But this adds another level to where you kind of learn about it, explain the history, and like the crash that happened in Marquette. I love going hiking, and that's going to be a trip for me at some point. And who knows, maybe we'll throw that on the YouTube channel. There's other questions too. We'll get to it. We're going to keep doing this kind of format as well. So we're going to get back to another episode. I got some ideas coming up. I talked about October. We also have some interviews in the works. I think you guys will like that. But, as usual, if you ever want to see something on the show, if you ever want to come on the show, if there's a particular topic you want to hear about, send us a line at dapodcast85@gmail.com. I would love to hear your thoughts, comments, suggestions. You guys always do help me to make the show better. So thank you. And thank you for listening. I love the stories. I love hearing people that they're really enjoying it and listening in the car. And I love resonating, connecting with folks. So thank you so much for everything that you guys do by tuning in and listening to the show. If you like it, please tell some friends about it. I enjoy it. It's a labor of love. But I do really enjoy seeing it grow and get more listeners. So thank you so much for helping me on that mission, because it's just me talking to myself if you guys aren't here. So I really appreciate everybody that takes some time out of their day to tune in and listen to what's going on. We're also on TikTok. We have some really cool videos on there. I find that people seem to like the TikTok videos, putting stuff on our YouTube channel. I'm planning on getting out and doing some flying soon. I just did my biannual, which got past that. Thank you. So signed off to keep flying. Still looking at that next plane purchase. So thinking of 182, but still working on some things on my end, trying to figure out what's the best avenue to do that. So I think we have some really cool content coming up. Like I said, check us out on all the social media reels out there. And until next time, my friends, I'll see you down the runway.